And this covenant that he'll confirm with many, as Chuck rightly points out, the covenant there, what is the covenant? The covenant that God made with his people. In Ezekiel, one of the reasons why we went to Ezekiel 8 tonight, God comes, he says, we made a covenant. You said you would be my people and I would be your God. I would be your one and only. But you've broken the covenant because you've gone after other gods. You have right here in my house set up, an idol to another god. Your women are crying for the name of another god. Your men are not worshiping me on the day that I told them to, but rather the sun on a different day. All of these things, he's coming down the line. He says, you know what? You promised to honor. You promised to cherish. You promised to obey. You like a husband to an unfaithful wife. You promised to do all of these things. And therefore, because of your unfaithfulness, I have to leave the home. I cannot continue to stay in this house while you are being unfaithful to me with other gods. Right here in my bedroom, you're bringing in other men. I mean, this is what God is saying. I cannot abide here with this. I'm leaving. And so he calls on them the covenant, to remember the covenant, and now he puts the consequences on them for that. Take a look at Daniel 11. Go to Daniel 11, verse 28. Daniel 11 expounds upon the work of an antichrist power. But look what the work of this antichrist power is. Go to 22. Look at 22. With the force of a flood. Have we read anything about that? Remember, the end of this will be with a flood. With the force of a flood, they shall be swept away from before him and be broken. And also the prince of the covenant. The same power that killed Jesus on the cross in Rome was the same power that came and swept the Jewish people away from their city like a flood. So here's this power at work. Jump down to verse 28. They kind of morph. As time goes on, they morph into this other kind of a power, that his heart being moved against what? The holy covenant. He does damage. Look at verse 30. He returns in rage. This is this antichrist power. In rage against the holy covenant to do damage. He shows regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. For people who are breaking God's covenant, his commandments. This power is saying, yeah, go for it. Let's do it. They're not being true to God. And so in verse 27, the one who's confirming or strengthening the covenant cannot be an antichrist power. Because the antichrist power always works to undermine the covenant. The covenant here, the one who's confirming or strengthening it, is Jesus Christ. He came to his people. And because remember at the chapter, verse 24, it says, 70 weeks are determined to finish transgression. Transgression against what? The covenant. To make an end of sins. Sins against what? The covenant, my relationship with you. To reconcile. And in Christ, all those things are done. We never had the power to do any of those things. And so Christ has to be accepted in order for any of those things to be done and the covenant to be confirmed. Unfortunately, many of the people of Israel rejected Christ, and with it, they rejected the ability to even fulfill this prophecy. Because outside of Christ, the promises of God, they're only to the seed. But in Christ, all the promises of God are yes. And so, this he, in verse 27, I believe must be Messiah the Prince. But I can understand how people get confused. If you just do a cursory reading, just kind of go over it quickly, you miss that. And you come up with some of these hairball ideas, Let's rip this 1 week out, throw it way down at the end of time, and,
And just from my own personal testimony, I was very much involved in the secret rapture. I read Hal Lindsey's Great Planet Earth. I listened to Jack Van Impe, and I had a number of his albums. I liken it to this, for myself anyway, that if you had grown up in a home and the only thing you had ever heard of was evolution, you had never heard of creation, you'd only heard evolution, then what is going to be your foundation for what you believe is how people came into existence? Evolution. Because that's all you know. And so if you've only grown up, all you've understood and heard is the secret rapture, that there's going to be a rapture of a 7-year period, then even if there's some loopholes in it, just like there's some loopholes in evolution, it's because the only thing you know, well, at least there's some credibility here, because some of the things make sense, you know. So that's why it can be understood. And then when you have something else to compare it to, creation compared to evolution. Oh, that makes a lot more sense now. Anyway, I'll just give my own personal testimony from that.
Are there any other questions on this? Because this, I mean, obviously we're building. Because next week, the 2300, if this isn't clear and you know, from these 4 verses, you know, if this isn't clear from the 4 verses, we need to make sure that it is before we are able to continue on. Julie?
Why does it say for 1 week?
Can't hear you. For 1 week?
Yeah.
It's the last week of...
Verse 27,
Yeah.
that he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. Up to this point, we've seen the angel told us, let's see.
6 and 7, 3.
The angel told us in verse 25 that there'll be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, which together makes 69 weeks. At the very beginning of verse 24, he told us there's 70 weeks total determined for your people. So there's 1 week left unaccounted for. And when he says, then, verse 27, he'll confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, it's speaking of the very last week that the angel has not addressed yet. And he says, during that week, confirming a covenant, in the middle of the week, he'll bring an end or fulfillment to sacrifice and offering.
Oh, so the covenant, confirming the covenant refers to him starting his ministry and then till Stephen was stoned.
That's right.
That's all.
That's that
That's
7th
right.
week that it's not accounted for.
Exactly.